This is my current keyboard, the Royal Kludge RK61. I modded it almost a year ago and it really has held up well, but I think it's time for a pretty big upgrade. So let's go over what we're going to need for this build. First things first, we got the base of this keyboard, the GMK67, which was about 65 bucks from Amazon. Next, we got the keycaps, which are off-white and a kind of tealish color, which were about 35 bucks on Amazon as well. For the switches, I got the Switch S Squared engine. I don't actually know exactly how to say that, but that's what they're called. They're about 25 bucks from KBD Craft's website. Next is just some painter's tape that I got for the back of the PCB for about 8 bucks. I got some 205 grade 0 lube for the stabilizers, which was about $13, and a small paintbrush that came with it. Next, we've got the Durox Smoky plate mounted stabilizers that were 12 bucks from Amazon. And lastly, a few miscellaneous things like this keycap and switch puller that I got from my old keyboard, and this small Phillips head screwdriver that I just had laying around. So the first thing I did was unbox the base of the keyboard and try to get it open. Now from my understanding, this keyboard is gasket mounted, which means it can't have any screws going into the PCB from the bottom, which means the only way for the top part of the case to be connected to the bottom part of the case is by a few clips that are very hard to take off. After successfully taking off the case of the keyboard, which did not need to be that stressful, I proceeded to lift up the whole PCB and everything connected to it and try to unplug the 3 cables that were connecting it to the battery. Just like taking the case apart, this was pretty stressful as well, since if I ripped a cable or something like that, then the keyboard would be destroyed. So I was trying to be as careful as I could. I tried to use the keycap puller because in a video I was watching, this person was using tweezers and I didn't have tweezers. Anyways, that didn't work. So eventually I just kind of pulled on the cable a little bit with my fingers and it did come off, but still very scary. Next, I unscrewed the top plate from the PCB, but for some reason the 4th screw wouldn't unscrew. You can't really see well in the video, but it was very frustrating, and eventually the bottom nut under it that was preventing it from being separated from the PCB just kind of fell off. So it came apart, but I don't know, pretty weird. Eventually I got it off though. After removing the top plate and the foam from the PCB, I ran into a slight issue. So for some reason on the top of the PCB, there's a weird thin plastic layer that is kind of like a sticker. I was confused because I turned on a video to see if that plastic layer was on other people's keyboards and it seemed like it wasn't. After peeling off a corner and it seemed like it was meant to come off, I very carefully peeled the entire thing off and nothing really happened. If any of you guys know what that was for, leave a comment down below because to this day, I still don't really know what that was for. Next thing I did was get ready for the tape mod. But before I could do that, I cut a few small rectangles out of the tape and put them on the PCB where the stabilizers would hit when they're pressed down. From my understanding, these are used to mitigate the bottoming out feeling when pressing down keys with stabilizers. Either way, it was very easy and quick, so there really is no downside. Now it's time to actually do the tape mod. Last time I did a tape mod on a keyboard, I used very thin painter's tape, which made it pretty tough since I had to have so many vertical layers. This time I made sure I got a big enough size to where I didn't need a lot of rows. I ended up putting 3 layers of painter's tape, which ended up making it sound just that little bit better. Before I put any tape on, I tried to think of how I would cut around the ports that I needed to plug things into later, and ended up just doing it after I put all the tape layers on because that would probably be easiest. Before even doing the tape mod, I had to decide when and how I was going to make the holes for the ports on the back of the PCB. I ended up fully putting the tape on without any holes, and then just making little notches in the tape after I was done with that. After doing everything I had to do with the PCB, I went ahead and took out the stabilizers that were already on the plate. I then very carefully lubed every stabilizer housing. Now I've never lubed any stabilizers before, and this part of the process was pretty easy. After finishing the housings, I went ahead and lubed up the wire. Now when you're lubing up the wire, you want to make sure you go slightly above the curve, since when the wire's in the housing, it still makes contact with the housing above the curve. So to make sure there's no rattling or scraping, you can do this as a safeguard. After lubing one side and successfully putting the housing onto the wire, I quickly lubed the other side of the wire and ran into my first, I guess you could say, problem. And it was mostly because I just have never done this before. Now I was watching a video to see how to do this, and the weird thing is I already put the housing on the other side, so I don't know why this is so difficult. I was under the impression when you put the wire into the housing slot and you turn the whole unit 90 degrees as the video was saying, that it would just click into place. What I know now is that you turn it and then you basically have to like snap it into place. It doesn't like do it itself. But I was stuck on this for like a very, very long time. Very frustrating. I did eventually find out how to do it through trial and error and got to work on every other stabilizer that I needed. Once I put together all 5 stabilizers, I went ahead and very painstakingly put them into the plate. I don't know why, but the entire process of doing everything to the stabilizers, including like lubing them and putting them into the plate, was very hard, and it was definitely because I just didn't know what I was doing. Now I do. Now I know how to put them in. But as I was doing it, I was getting increasingly more frustrated. But eventually, after a while, I got them into the plate as well. Next, I grabbed the PCB, put the multiple layers of foam back on, screwed the plate and the PCB back together, I then put the case foam back into the case, connected all the cables back to the PCB, and put the top part of the case back on. And I was now ready to put the switches in. Now that all the switches are in, it is finally time for the finishing touches, the keycaps. I was actually hesitant to go with this color scheme on my keyboard because I was scared it wouldn't really fit in with my setup, since all my other keyboards have either been black, white, or white and black. But after seeing the finished product, I am so happy that I went for these. So now what everyone's been waiting for, the sound test and the sound comparison to my last keyboard.